And welcome back. We're going to dive right into the last session. It's called Branding Your Extension. It's a family thing. We've got two speakers, Scott Colby and Jennifer Newman. Scott is an advisor to craft beverages with Market Your Craft. He empowers owners and managers to drive traffic, build engagement, and capture new sales using high-performance brand marketing. His passion for storytelling is contagious, sharing 20 plus years of experience working with companies like Jim Beam, Oakley, and Sierra Nevada Brewing. Scott asks you to enter with an open mind about marketing, and I cannot agree with him enough. Marketing as an asset, and leave ready to immediately expand the capabilities of your internal teams and grow your business. Yes, 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 Scott, marketing is important. It's not an afterthought. So Jennifer Newman founded the Young Lion Brewing Company in upstate New York in August 2015 and opened in 2017. In her role as founder, Newman assumes all operational responsibilities, including strategic planning, vendor relations, HR, budgeting, licensing, strategy, sales. All of you small business owners are nodding your heads. You know all of this. You do it all yourself. She also, of course, is in charge of beer tasting. Before fulfilling her dream to launch a brewery, she was a business analyst for Price Waterhouse, Scholastic, and Cox Communications, among others. And she co-founded 3 successful startups. I think they're going to have a lot of knowledge for us. Welcome.
Great, thanks for having us. So to kick things off, what the overview of what Scott and I were going to try to cover today. As a craft beverage producer, undoubtedly you've considered or even tried leveraging high performers in your portfolio by introducing line extensions. And while the upsides of this are obvious, momentum, awareness, sales, just to name a few, there are also risks that we need to think about as well. Confusion, cannibalization, and perhaps increased competition. So Scott and I hope we will show and share proven marketing and branding strategies to build confidence in your new product entry.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started. There's a lot of content to cover, but we're going to try and leave 10 or so minutes for the end. And if you want to submit a question in the chat, Tara and Michelle are going to help us to moderate that. So keep us honest about the time. You know, we really want to talk about the story to start with. You folks are generally established. You probably have 1 to 4, maybe even 5 years under your belt, if not more. And so stories should be fairly familiar to you. The story is yours. It's how you were founded. It's how you've grown up. It's what you've gone through, especially in the last year. What is the story that the customer wants to hear? It's not necessarily that you started brewing in your basement. It's the point at which they can connect with your brand and it means something more to them. And so you're basically answering the question of why they should care. And you're going to see that theme throughout in this presentation. If you haven't already read these books, and you're going to see this, Jen and I are going to try and give you tips and tricks and resources that you can use to really hone your brand, especially when you're launching brand extensions. But 2 great books, can't suggest them enough. All Marketers Are Liars, which is a funny title, but it's absolutely true in a lot of ways. It's not a matter of necessarily telling an untruth. It's a matter of getting the right story to the right person who is in a position to buy your product. The same thing is true with Building a Brand Story from Donald Miller. He really talks about brands being the guides, not the heroes. The heroes are the customers that are making the decisions, and the brands are helping them get there. How are you, as a craft beverage brand, really helping a customer to solve the problem that they uniquely have?
So the way that we ended up building our brand, building your brand and figuring out who you are is really challenging. In fact, when we started up, we really had no clue as to who we are. At the time, we were, a group of people that had gotten together and wanted to start a brewery, but we didn't have that genuine story. One thing that was unique about us, though, is that we all happened to be women that were starting this brewery, but we were shying away from it at the time. And the way that our brand and our language actually became genuine was we were shying away from being women because we wanted the liquid to stand on our own. And we were saying, okay, this is, this is who we are, and this is, we're not gonna hide behind the woman card. But what happened was I actually went to another conference, Brewbound, and did a pitch slam there. And the marketing team said, that is your unique identifier, both on a social level and a marketing level. It's important for you to actually lead with that. And so as soon as we started leading with that, and like I said, it was genuine, which I think is an important aspect of that. Our story actually fell into place. And as that organically happened, I think the story became stronger.
So what Jen's referencing is trying to find what makes you unique, trying to find what's your differentiator. And again, sometimes it's obvious when you're on the inside, but it's not so obvious to a customer on the outside who has tens, 20s, if not hundreds of different choices in a particular market. So if you're really taking an objective look at the story that you're telling to customers, you might ask yourself some of these questions. Who's your perfect customer? Have you really thought about that? Whether it's Joe or Jane at the end of the bar, or if there's a bigger ocean out there of customers who really would line up with your product. Understanding your mission, this kind of falls in line with what everybody's talking about being a purpose-driven company. It doesn't necessarily need to be heady or academic. It can just be what you stand for, what your mission is. How is that reflected in your brand story? And how can that draw additional audiences in who think that same way? Shaping the experience. What if you wanted to change the way people drink your beverage category? I mean, there's a lot of competition out there, to be sure, but to add something different is truly unique. And so you would lean into that aspect of the story if it was a differentiator for you. Raising your voice and showing your personality, using the words that you use around the brewery, the winery, or the distillery. That this is your personality, and it can shine through, and it should shine through in your brand story.
So, so one thing with when you're working with your story, as you're trying to think it through, keep it as genuine and as simple as you possibly can. So, after we came up with this really long story about who we are, but then I thought it was really important for us to pare it down and make it simple. And by making it simple, just even a couple of sentences or two, that elevator speech, it makes it so much easier for your team and your customers to understand and repeat it. And don't overthink it. So that I'm a famous overthinker. So I was thinking about how everybody was going to take it from every single angle. I think it's definitely more important to be genuine, because the more genuine it is, the clearer that it's going to be to both for your team to communicate it and for your customers to understand it, and then for your customers to repeat it to their friends.
Yeah, it's such a key point, worth overemphasizing. It's free advertising for you. A lot of people take a look at marketing as an expense. Well, yeah, similar to how tanks and fermentation vessels are expenses, you should expect the same amount of return from your marketing that you do your vessels and your equipment. But you have to look at it a little differently, and to have ambassadors out there who are saying or telling your story on your behalf, unpaid, not only amplifies and broadens your message.
Right. We live in a world of shares and retweets. And if you can maximize that and keep that message going, it's really powerful.
Yeah, so very true. Retweets in a good way, non-political.
In a good way.
So we're going to move on to knowing your audience. And we talked a little bit about this just a second ago. Who is your customer? And what story do you share with them in order to help them solve a problem? And we're not talking about a financial problem. We're not talking about difficulties or challenges with their life, but they may very well have a fundamental problem with the way that craft is served up nowadays. How confusing it is. Oh, I go to the shelf and I see thousands of choices. I'm overwhelmed. These are problems that customers have in their everyday lives. Now, how can you help them? How can you help them to answer the questions that they have, make it easier to buy your product? How can you help them to always use you as the go-to because you're uncomplicated, you're easy to understand, you over-satisfy expectations at every touch point?
So, you know, in the craft beverage industry, we're always not known for having the biggest budgets, especially when we're starting up. But I will say that one investment that you might want to think about making is trying to find out either IRI data or Nielsen data of where you are in the market and where your competitors are in the market as well. And the reason that I say this is because the reality that you have and the perception that you have could actually be very different from the reality of what is actually out there and who actually is selling a lot of beer or craft beverage and who is not. So make sure you keep your eyes and ears open, and it will really sort of pull back the curtain as to, you know, where those markets are and who is truly succeeding in the region that you're selling. So one example of this is, and something you also want to do is, for those areas that you find that you are succeeding, that you weren't quite sure that you how your sales were going, you really want to try to maximize this. I have a friend who does craft soda, and he was telling me that that there was just this, all of a sudden, in this small town in the Midwest, was suddenly selling all of this ginger beer, and he couldn't figure out why. And it was because Moscow Mules apparently have a huge following in that area, and he was able to target that particular area for Moscow Mules, partner and do other things in there, and then leverage that to increase his sales. So truly knowing what is selling where, I think, is an extremely powerful tool as all of our markets start to become more and more crowded. And don't lose that opportunity, because if you don't grab it, you know, your competitors will.
I love Jen's examples, and it's worth mentioning, because you're going to hear this elsewhere. We're not really looking from a truly competitive perspective. We're all friends in the industry, all ships rise, but at the same time, you need to watch out for your business and you need to keep the lights on. And so to the extent that you can be very strategic by understanding your place within the rest of the market, that includes understanding what your competitors are doing so you can do something different, or in some cases do something better. And that's, of course, not missing opportunities like this one.
And I think some of you also might be in this position. I don't know how many of you out there that are listening right now are actually nationwide. But if for our particular brewery, we decided to go deep rather than wide. And the downside of that is that, or the thing to be cautious with the sales areas that you currently are in, is that I'm sure many of you are experiencing this. People from all over the country or all over the state or all over the region outside of where you're selling are constantly pinging you with, can you come do this sampling here? Can you spend marketing money here? Can you do this? And as I said before, at Craft Beverages, you know, we have limited resources. So I think it's really important, even though you could justify in your mind, well, someday I may go into that territory. I think you really need to focus on where you are and then also where you want to go. So you want to focus on where you are, make sure your dollars and your resources stay there, that you can continue to grow in that area. But I think it's also very important to be pulled into the next location that you want to go. So another marketing opportunities you might want to take are the areas that you want to actually go into but aren't there yet, because particularly if you're dealing with distributors, because you want the distributor that, you know, maybe that you land with in your next location to want you. And if you can be pulled and have built a market in that location prior to going to that discussion with that distributor, it can be very powerful. So try to get yourself pulled into a location, a finite location, not spread out, rather than pushing your way in.
Awesome.
And social media. I bet a lot of the other craft beverage companies out there right now can relate to this. A while back, the brut IPA was just, everybody wanted a brut IPA. And you would have thought from all of the social media and everything that everyone was saying was that brut IPAs were going to be the biggest moneymaker for all of us. So we all made brut IPAs and everybody came in and bought a lager. So rather than buying the brut IPA, so it was a huge fail in the industry for most of us. It's really important to listen to social media, but really know who does move the needle, because I'm sure you are all very aware there can be a very small but very loud minority out there that makes it look like all of these customers want this particular thing. Make sure that you have the data and the market research to back that up before you act on what you're seeing on social media, because sometimes perception is not reality. Anything you want to add to that, Scott?
Well, it's such a good example. The brut IPA just didn't go anywhere, and everybody was trying to figure it out. I have to imagine a lot of you out there right now are probably considering infusions, perhaps CBD, THC, if it's available, or an opportunity in your market. And that is sort of the contemporary example. It's today's example of the hot flavor trend, if you will. And so you have to make a decision based on, one, your story, your kind of true north, whether or not that fits, and two, what really the demand is for it in your market, and all those very same things that Jen said about understanding the data and really sizing up the audience to make sure that what you're hearing is truly going to move the needle.
So true.
Oh my gosh, this one is so much fun to talk about, and it's challenging to most of us, right? We've all been in positions where we've tried to find the perfect name, the name that just captures it, nails it. It's the name that when you're accepting the award at the regional, national, or other competition, you want to be standing on stage and you want them to belt this out over the loudspeaker. And man, is it difficult. It couldn't be any more challenging to find a name that hasn't been used. But it's a natural extension of the storytelling we're talking about. And if you have the wrong name, or if you present the brand in the wrong way, then it's a point of disconnect with the customer. And honestly, as a small to mid-sized craft beverage producer, you need all the cards stacked in your favor, because that name really connects them to your business in a way that the liquid stops short. And I'll start this one out, but Jen's got such a great example. You can really take a look at naming from a number of different ways. We're going to start out by looking at naming by style. And sometimes this is absolutely the right choice, like the stories that we're going to hear from Jen, where you basically rely or lean into the strength of your brand name, and then you call your product what it is by style. Now, this is an opportunity to be very true to style with respect to the liquid, and then perhaps you have opportunities also with the packaging to differentiate, which Jen is going to talk about.
Right. So for us, at least in the beginning, no one knew who we were. They didn't know who Young Lion was. So it was extremely important for us to start building that connection with our customers based on the brewery itself, rather than just creating a beer that sum of itself. So our approach, which was just the choice that we made, was that we were going to lead with Young Lion, and that we were then for all of our beers, it's Young Lion Czech Pilsner, it's Young Lion IPA, it's Young Lion DIPA for our core beers, so that they would begin connecting directly, with the brewery. And then as time went on, and as we've grown as a brewery, we changed the backgrounds of the cans themselves, while doing the traditional marketing, keeping the logo for our beers front and center. And now we're starting to get into different names because I feel like we have enough market penetration and enough connection with the brewery that we can start that sort of perpetual motion of getting our drinkers to come back and knowing who we are. But that's not always what some breweries choose for their particular market, or craft beverages do for their particular market.
Yeah, it's so true. There are pros and cons to each approach. And as a time check, we're at about halfway through our content. So we're going to, move it along. The theme is another way, in addition to style, that you can name your product. And this is a more fanciful name, right? You could ask yourself, is it reflective of my tone, my personality? Is it a one-word name? Is it half of a sentence? All of these things are in bounds for you. And the more obscure, or the more unique, the easier it is to get proper trademark and other state and local and federal approval for name usage, right? But again, it has to be reflective of the story. So make sure that it's true to you. It can't be easily confused with other competitors in the market. The last thing you want is a strongly worded letter about intellectual property on your doorstep. And you can do that by checking the availability. Just do a little bit of homework. For any of these categories, whether it's beer, whiskey, cider, mead, there are resources out there that are almost the definitive guides, the catalogs for all the products that are being used, whether they're being rated, if they've been published in a magazine. Some of these sources are going to tell you whether or not there's prior use to a name that you're really getting excited about before you put it into the big time.
Exactly right. Okay. So there were several different types of extensions that we thought about doing, but we were so glad that actually we did some analysis before we jumped right into them. So before committing to your production, give your extension a fighting chance by first testing it with your audience. So we have a methodology at Young Lion that probably a lot of you do, and it involves our tap room. I mean, the tap room is just the greatest gift because people actually pay you to come and give you marketing research. So we do an R&D batch, as I'm sure many of you do. We put it out into the tap room. We see what people like, and we see what they don't like. Be cautious of this. This may come up in a later slide, but be cautious of this, because keep in mind that the people that are coming here to your tap room usually are predisposed to like you. They're there because they want to like you, and they're there actually to have they're expecting to have a good time. So another great resource is for, and I'm sure many of you do this as well, is actually samplings. People are a little more inclined to be a little more honest if they are, in a store or at a restaurant and you happen to be doing a sampling. So make sure that you test out before you actually launch it. Another thing, a very important thing to do, at least at Young Lion, is we make sure that we ask our team. I pride myself in surrounding myself with people that are smarter than I am, and we have an incredible team with wonderful experience, and they are the eyes and ears. I respect the fact that my sales team is boots on the ground. They are out there every day, and I am not necessarily out there every day talking with customers. So what they see and what they hear is just so important. And on a management level, I would say asking them is actually extremely important as well. Because when you ask your team, when you ask your distillers or your brewers, and your sales team and your social media person, what they're seeing and feeling, and helping them have input in what it is that you're developing, they're going to have buy-in, and they're going to be more excited, in theory, about what it is that you're producing, because they feel like more a part of the actual production rather than just handing them, saying, here's the product, go sell it. And they understand it better as well. They understand the organic process of how you ended up with the extension that you ended up with. So our team meets regularly. Oops, get you back. Sorry, Scott. We meet regularly to try new beverages. We listen for feedback. We make sure we take notes. That's the other thing too. You get a lot of great information. Make sure you document it and store it somewhere. And then make sure you pilot it before you put it into full production. Thanks, Scott. And then the really unsexy stuff is important too. In fact, some of this unsexy stuff might actually take you down a road where you say, you know what, this particular extension is just too costly for us to put out there in the market, and the margin would be too small. So before you launch anything, make sure that you've tested it and that you can execute it well on the production scale that you want to. Check out the regulatory rules. I mean, there's new regulatory rules for things like seltzers, and there's and there may be things under FDA versus TTB that you need to make sure that you're following. Labeling laws, extremely important. Make sure anything new that you might be doing. For example, just as Scott said, if we're going to start going into the cannabis arena, what needs to be done there. Raw material planning, especially post-COVID. And I think we're all struggling with that a little bit. Make sure that you don't put all of your marketing dollars and plan on launching something and then you can't get the materials you need to launch it. And then finally, UPC planning and retail. And I link in with this also retail planning. Make sure that you have your channel set up of where those sales are actually going to go. Make sure that those channels are there. And then make sure that you have your UPC planning as well, so that you're all mapped out and that you can seamlessly move your extension into the market without a hiccup. And then, sorry, I think we kind of touched on this before. The tasting room is just such a great place for to get that feedback. But be careful, because sometimes the messages that you might get might not be as objective as some of those out there in the world.
It makes great sense. We have access to so much data right at our fingertips without having to buy it. Just understand what you have and size it up based on the audience. So we alluded to this a little bit earlier, and that is that it's important to understand how your story fits, how the story fits in the conversation that a potential customer is having about whether or not to visit your tasting room or to visit somebody else's. Now, this is not a matter of us versus them. It's just a matter of where you sit in their consideration set, where you sit with respect to the other 5, 10 breweries, wineries, distilleries, tasting rooms in the area for a Friday evening that a potential new customer has free and they're taking their friends and family out for a meal or a drink. Where do you fit when they're considering it? Don't make it hard for them to say yes. Don't make it hard for them to decide that you are going to be the right destination for that evening.
And remember, not all beverages are going to appeal to all of your audiences. It's impossible to be all things to all drinkers. So after we had done the research, looking at Nielsen data and trying to figure out who our drinker was, and also listening on social media and sort of doing analysis on who our followers were, we deliberately chose to appeal to drinkers that were just getting into craft. We realized that was really our sweet spot. We always want to appeal to the most experienced and educated palate. We want the high scores from those, and we want to continue winning awards with our beers. But really, the drinker that resonates with us the strongest are those people that are just getting into craft, that are getting the excitement of putting the correct beverage into the correct glass, and the romanticism of it, and starting to understand hops. So that's our target market. And so it's just important for you guys to identify who is your target market. Is it barrel aged? Is it is it a younger market? Is it an older market? But just to try to identify those markets will make getting out your message a lot easier.
Well, to Jen's point, start out small. Start out with a market that really and you understand, an audience, a drinker, and build from there, learn. We have to be commercially viable, of course, so it can't be such a niche market that you're only going to appeal to a handful of people. That much is obvious. But you also don't need to shoot for the stars and have everybody in your sights. There's some sweet spot right in the middle. So we're all friends, but you can also be very strategic with respect to your next door neighbor. And it's important to understand where this fits into your marketing strategy and your business plan. What we would suggest is that quarterly, if not, 2 times a year, let's say, just do a little bit of secret shopping. Be a customer of your competitors. Understand what they're doing different from you. It's going to give you a perspective on your own efforts in order to either tighten some things up or double down in particular areas where you're particularly strong. You're not going to know that unless you get out there and shop your competitors. And so we like, formal or not, however you want to log this data, go out there and understand what they're doing on social media, understand what they're doing digitally. What does their tasting room experience look like? How's their product, their packaging? What's their presence at shelf? Understanding these things make you even that much more high performing as a company, as well as strategic in how you're going to stand out and your story is really going to land with that target customer, even though we're all friends. So the last couple areas that we're going to cover before questions, branding. A lot of people think of branding as the colors and the imagery and what it looks like on can or on bottle. And that is true. That's the truth. Especially important is making these conscious decisions when you're doing and launching a brand extension. A lot of these proven tools and techniques that Jen has really offered up based on her experience with Young Lion and what we've talked about in this presentation, you can use those for your main brand. You can also use those for extensions, whether that extension is a new entry into an existing line or a sub-brand, a brand that really coattails or dovetails off of the strength and maybe the prominence, market or otherwise, of your main brand in order to gain traction early. And so take a look at the brand that you've established, the story you've established, and when you're thinking seriously about a brand extension and the viability of it, understand what aspects of the main brand you're really going to use or leverage with that sub-brand. When it's important to drive sales early from a distributor or retail perspective, what do you really need in order for the sub-brand, the new entry in a crowded market, to gain the kind of priority with the distributors or shelf space at retail? You have to make conscious decisions about which direction your sub-brand and your new extension are going to take.
So we actually made we actually made the conscious decision to focus on our brand, as we talked about before, with the style and the name being secondary. But the goal for that, for us anyway, was to create that billboard effect and to not get lost or confused on the shelf.
And they did it so well. And we talked a little bit about this, but you can imagine the strength of the brand versus the novelty of the fanciful name, the strength of the color palette and the consistent packaging versus something that's grabbing someone's attention as a one-off and a sea of potential sameness. Now, you have to make that decision. To Jen's point, you need to weigh the pros and the cons of it. But when you're being fanciful and you're leaning away from a strong brand presence like this one for Young Lion at shelf, you have to be very careful and very cautious because it could be very polarizing and you could land in a completely different marketing space than you really intended.
And just one quick little tidbit is that, as you're trying to think about extensions, one thing that has been really successful for us and that we see it repeatedly in our market, and you may have seen it in yours as well, is to find a partner. And so collabs obviously extremely powerful, Generally, the collabs that we do with other breweries, they usually sell out before before they even go out the door. So very powerful to put those two breweries together, and that's really the beauty of the craft beverage, particularly the brewing industry. I'm so proud to be a part of it. But you don't have to stay, within your product line. We've been very successful partnering with other local coffee companies. We've seen other types of chocolate companies have been very successful to partnering with them. So you can really gain a whole new market group by both of you combining forces and sharing your marketing together. And the retailers love it. They love the concept of being able to cross brand. Particularly, grocery stores love to be able to put two completely different products that pair well together right next to each other in samplings or on shelves. So a lot of creative opportunities for displays there. Just a little something that we've been successful with.
It's an awesome example. And from a marketing perspective, you can tell this story all day. Everybody understands this, but there's a certain wear out factor with updates, news, and posts about your core brand. But when you offer something up seasonally, there's a bit of a spike and a little bit of an energy. When you offer up a collaboration, the same thing. And it also overlaps with two new audiences. They get yours, you get theirs. And so there's a lot of benefit to collaborations. Just do your homework. Make sure that they're the right partner. You're not going to be married to them forever, but you also want to make sure it's positive public relations.
Exactly. Well, and earned press comes. Earned press. It's easier to get earned press when you're launching something like this because everybody wants to talk about it in the news. So make sure that you take advantage of that PR list. Hopefully, you're all collecting a PR list, and that when something exciting like that comes out, that's the type of press release that a lot of reporters actually are looking for because it's something a little bit different.
Last slide for us. I'll start out, but Jen deserves to finish. So the idea, Jen started talking about it with public relations, just put together a plan that holds this brand extension or a special release up on a pedestal in your audience's mind. The current customers are going to love the fact that you're innovative and new. The new customers are going to have attention where they didn't have attention before, potentially, to your brand. They're going to pay attention in a way that you really want them to. They're going to start talking about it. There's going to be energy and momentum there. You really just have to put a little bit of time against the calendar and understand where you're going to activate social, digital, press, and the other marketing vehicles available to you.
Important to, as you get that calendar together, make sure you be organized, but don't necessarily be rigid, especially if you've got two products, one product that might cannibalize the next one in the market. Try to, even though it's hard production-wise, try to launch as best you can. When is the right time and when one of your extensions might be moving out of the market, or say if you have one particular kind, we do a new extension every 4 weeks. So as one is moving out, we want to move that next one in an organic way. So there is something to be said for being flexible with your schedule and your calendar as much as you can be. Distributors, really important to arm them with the tools that they need. Make sure that they have the sell sheets, and retailers, make sure that you've already organized as you get ready for your launches. Make sure you have that POS ready to go, and then coordinate that specifically, your launches. It's really powerful if you can do all of that in a coordinated way. Once again, hopefully not too rigidly, but you can have your social media, do a teaser, do your launch, and then hopefully do your sold out post all in an order. Very powerful, and your followers get used to seeing that that something exciting is coming. I can get it right now. Oh shoot, I missed it. It's gone. So that sort of flow and dance with your customers is a very powerful thing to clear the shelves of what it is that you're trying to get out the door.
So with that, we just want to encourage you again to look at marketing as part of the fabric of your business rather than something that you buy. Jen and I went through tools and tips and very practical examples on how to successfully market your brand extension so that you can drive traffic, build engagement, and capture new sales for your brand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love how practical your advice was. And I love how you were thinking about ways to think about marketing that might be obvious, but might be one of those things that are, some of those things that are so obvious you don't even notice it. And I'm thinking particularly of your tasting room as a focus group. You know, I mean, you can get so much data and feedback just that way without spending a single cent. Totally important idea that I think a lot of brewery owners overlook. And also secret shop your competitors. Again, I think everybody wants to go visit their friends who own breweries to see what they're doing, but you know, you get caught in the day-to-day and you don't make time to do it, but also carve out that time because it is a way to get a business edge if you're sort of scoping out, secretly shopping what your competitors are doing. Now, we do have one question so far, and I think we'll have time for another one if anybody's got any they're sitting on. But the question is, are there any current brands that you think have done a good job with their brand extensions? What did they do right that smaller producers can replicate?
Some brands that have done a really good job. Well, certainly every single seltzer, you can, if you want to look at the big guys and see how they did it. I mean, that's, you know, as, you know, we start to toy around, everybody toys around in their annual business plan with their distributors with seltzers, and is their room. Certainly you can see, you know, a perfect methodology of how to launch it. And you can see both examples. You can see both the example that, you know, that Young Lion follows, which is, you know, really following and leveraging the branding itself, and then using that leverage out in the marketplace. And you can see some of the big guys, you know, I think Constellation just, you know, came out with one that really doesn't follow their branding or their label quite as closely, and aren't really leaning back on that brand the way that Scott says. They went a little more fanciful, and they went a little off to the side while still connecting with their market. Anyone you can think of, Scott, that's done?
Yeah, I feel like we're seeing brewers, distillers, winemakers cross over into other categories now. Brewers who are starting to distill, for example, similar process and similar passion. And so those extensions are very natural, and you've got an established customer base where you're able to sell not only your beer, but your new spirit in that instance. And then from a national perspective, I always have a lot of respect for Ken Grossman and the team at Sierra Nevada, and their Hazy Little Thing project has exploded into a family of extensions that are highly engaging and highly profitable for them. So it's a success story at a bigger scale.
Right, and I think too, also, as you're thinking about extension, make sure that you also explore, if that's a time when you're starting to explore extension, start exploring if there's a different packaging that actually might be a better fit for you as well. So Hazy Little Thing is a great example. They also do a 19.2 in their Hazy Little Thing, and I know that that can also be very powerful and reach a market that it hadn't reached before. So Hazy Little Thing is a fantastic example. So make sure that that if you have the resources to be able to do it, to open your mind up a little bit and think about if there are opportunities in different packages, and rather than the one that you may traditionally be in right now with your current products.
I think that's a great place to end. On a positive example, on a strong note, a fabulous brewery. And I do thank you both, Scott and Jen. And I thank all of you for watching and participating. Remember, the platform's going to continue to stay open for connecting and for rewatching any of these sessions you might have missed or want to go back and take some notes on. Please join us October 19th through 20th in Louisville, Kentucky for the Craft Beverage Expo and Distribution Conference, the first one that will be in person in a year. And that will be followed the following day, October 21st, for Women in Craft, which is always a fabulous event hosted by Peggy Noe Stevens, who is just a female icon in the whiskey industry. That said, for any other information or for feedback and dates for future events, if you want to get them on your calendar early, visit the website at craftbeverageexpo.com. That will do it for me and for all of us here at CBE. Have a good and safe summer, and we'll see you in a few months.
Thank you.
Thank you.